Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Crown of Stones, Magic-Borne by C.L. Schneider, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue. Analia placed the stones in a tight circle on the altar. There were 9, uncut and on the small side: celestite, sapphire, magnetite, ruby, spinel, diamond, topaz, amber, and obsidian. Touching each in turn, her aged fingers flowed across the jagged tops from one to the next. A pulse of color followed, making the air between the stones seem to blur and the hues to merge. Glancing behind her, Analia regarded the 8 hooded figures standing silently off to the side. Their consent was not required for her to continue. She was, after all, their equal. But choices of weight, decisions affecting the whole of the empire, were not meant for the shoulders of a single man or woman, and no greater choice had been made in the history of the Shinri as this one. The 8 nodded in approval, one after the other, so there would be no mistake. Analia returned the gesture. Her sandals shifted in the layer of silt on the cave floor as she turned back to face the crowd. The weight of the moment would lend a quiver to her voice. Yet, Analia made no attempt to calm her nerves. Let them assume age is the culprit, she thought. Better that than betray the true precipice in which their nation stood. Society had passed judgment enough on the ruling house. She would have it no more. Analia beckoned with her hands. Come forward, all of you. The eyes on her flitted elsewhere, hands clenched, feet shifted. Analia wasn't surprised. Being chosen by the house was an honor, yet their hesitation for the ritual was understandable. Magic, blood, and souls would be taken. From this day, the future of the Shinri would be forever changed. For if it was not, it will continue to crumble under the influence of corruption and anarchy. Such an end was unthinkable. The ability to channel magic was a gift of the gods, a responsibility bestowed at the beginning of time to the Shinri alone. Given in this holy place, Analia knew, as she glanced proudly about the waterfall-ringed room. Her eyes landed on the well in its center. Though what lived inside was not visible from her angle, Analia envisioned the auras that swam inside. Imagination was unnecessary for what dwelled within the cavern walls. Their glow seeped out from the gaps between the cascades. Watching it gave her strength, and a confident, determined smile emerged. There could be no other course. The oracles have spoken. Fate has guided their visions. And death will guide my hand. Waywardness among a people so superior would not be tolerated, no matter the cost. Analia hid her smirk as the young men and women lined up. Their obedience betrayed what she already knew. They had not the courage to defy her for long. She wondered if her fellow house members were grieving over what was to come. Regardless, they would never show it, nor would they flinch. They would commit their sons and daughters to the undertaking as promised. Still, she counted to ensure none had recanted. The number must be exact. 18. Good. You are all here. Her gaze wandered over them again, their faces youthful and fresh, with bones as sharp as the stones they channeled. Their white eyes were wary, more from awe than fright. Most had never traveled so far outside the city. Theirs was a generation with little care for tradition. It was a shortcoming that left them ignorant of the impending ritual's outcome. They were unaware that only one would leave unscathed. 9 would never leave at all. Analia positioned them around the altar. Each of you who share familial blood will place one hand on the stone directly in front of you and your sibling. Her order was followed. At contact, color pulsed beneath their fingers. You will pick up the stone together and move it to the center of the altar. Place them as I have, in a circular formation. Channel as you normally would a small measure of the stone's power, but do not remove your hand, no matter what what you feel. Is that clear? There were cautious nods all around. You may begin. Analia peered over once more at her colleagues. Their white eyes had darkened, adopting the color of the stone chosen to represent each of their families. She felt their magic, ripe and resonating with intent. Their chant was a low, melodic sound. It fled their lips like a chorus of distant thunder. Their level of skill made traditional vocal casting unnecessary. Yet she appreciated their caution. In this, there could be no mistakes. Listening to the words of the spell fill the cave, Analia offered a silent prayer for fate's blessing. She hoped that, centuries later, this moment would be seen as the turning point in Shinri history. That rupturing their gifts, dividing the people and their magic at the very core, would put the power back where it belonged. If it did, she and the other first families would be hailed as heroes. If it failed, there would never be a greater tragedy. Analia drew the dagger from the folds of her robe. The stone-laden hilt of the Nortali glistened and pulsed in her grip. Power swept into her and she breathed, deep and grateful, deeper as the vibrations pierced her veins. Eyes radiant, saturated with power and conviction, Analia made her way around the circle of 18. All of them frozen by the spell, her presence was no longer noticed as she halted briefly at every other one, lingering only to place blade to throat and slide it across. She tried not to pause longer upon reaching her own sons. They were close, only a year apart in age. The pain would be great for the one who lived, but he was a Wraith. He would survive. Cutting him open, Analia moved on to the next. Her quick work splattered blood on the stones. Their appetite whet, the spell begged for more, drawing and siphoning until crimson rolled like mud down the snared, trembling bodies. The magic they channeled fled with it, slipping over arms, hands, and fingertips. Blood and magic slithered into the circle. It seeped between the stones. Gaps filled. Colors flowed and ran, rolling like liquid. The sides of the stones shifted and blurred. Solidity lost, their edges melted into one into the other. As they fused, power built within the glistening cavern walls, tensing the air, tightening and warping it. One after another, the exsanguinated bodies fell. The auras they shed secreted deep, booming vibrations. Its pulse escalated painfully with each kill. Analia slew the last one. She beamed with pride and satisfaction at what their sacrifice had created. The auras had united, forming a circlet that was seamless and whole, bursting with more magical power than any artifact the house had spelled before. For a moment, she wished the Shinri were governed as other realms by a single sovereign leader, because surely what they had made here today was a crown fit for a king. Chapter 1. Swords met. Sparks erupted. The strident song of colliding steel rang out beneath the full moon, bouncing down into the valley of sand, echoing in my head. The shock wave raced up my arms. It radiated through my overworked shoulders, painful and familiar. The tremor set off a different kind of spark, one that was deeper and far more troubling. No magic, I thought, ignoring the pang. No magic. Grunting, both hands gripping the stone-studded hilt, I pushed. My opponent pushed back. It wasn't much of a standoff, at least not one I was likely to win. His swarthy Lingorian form was broad and hulking. His determination was unflagging. The man possessed a ridiculous amount of stamina and zero impulse to flee or survive. His instinct for self-preservation had been smothered, choked out of existence. His will and spirit restrained. One lone thought filled the man's spelled mind. Kill. It was an aim that was chillingly apparent in the swirling red-black of his eyes. My boots slid. Pebbles kicked up behind me. They only had one place to go, over, as the crumbling edge of the cliff grew steadily closer. I dug deeper. I shoved harder. With a brief release of one hand from the hilt, I risked a punch. My knuckles split. His broad face, yet intact, cracked with only a smile. No magic. No magic. My internal chant continued. It was a weak weapon at best, a temporary deterrent in an unwinnable war I'd been fighting my whole life. I could kill the Lingorian man trying to shove me off the mountaintop with little more than a thought. And that was the problem. One thought would turn to another. One spell would become two, a little magic suddenly became a lot, and the glut of ancient power I'd given shelter to would rise up and imprint another scar on my skin. When too many scars had formed, I would change. I would become something else. I would be no use to her. My opponent's eyes suddenly widened with delight. Ha! He laughed, spewing stale breath in my face as he reveled in the sound of reinforcements clamoring up the rise. They were a ways off. Their boisterous cries were still issuing from within the boundaries of the moonlit woods beyond the stream. Yet he clearly had more help than I did. Your string of foul deeds ends today, witch, and I will forever be known as the man who took the life of Ian Troy. Don't count on it, I blustered, though whatever I was going to do, it had to be soon. I risked a glance behind me. Far below, a good 2 miles out into the desert, torch poles ran along a massive black wall. The monstrosity protected the developing city that sprawled out for miles within its dark confines. Inside the wall, lanterns twinkled. Their yellow pinpricks sprinkled the city with light, but they were too far out to brighten the slope beneath me. Still, I didn't need more than moonlight to know I was running out of ground. Down had been the direction I was headed, just not this way. I'd thought to descend with a rope and approach the city covertly. Encountering guards this early on was not part of the plan. Their presence, though a problem, was heartening in its own way. It meant my father was worried. He should be, I thought. I'd barely found out I had a daughter before Jim Reth took her away. For well over a month there had been no sighting of Lyra, no news of any kind. So far, my attempts to gain entrance to his walled city to search for her had failed. They wouldn't with magic, I reasoned, but I'd already risked more than I should by opening a doorway to come here. While my accuracy with creating magical portals had improved, collapsing the space between realms was far from a minor spell. The larger the spell, the higher the price, the more likely my affliction might spread. And I still had to get back. Releasing a howl of determination, the guard bore down harder. His blade crept closer. My boots slid farther. The calls of his friends were growing nearer by the second. Dots of approaching torches splashed orange against the night. Faint shapes flitted in and out of the dark maze of branches. There were more than I thought. In minutes, they would reach the stream, a wide, icy brook fed by a spring thaw from the peak above. Once they crossed it, I would be cut off from the water and my way out. Frustrated, I threw my head forward into my opponent's. He threw his back, harder. Pain splashed out across my forehead. Blood trickled into my eyes. The auras swirling inside me stirred. No magic, I swore. No magic. The heel of my boots sunk over the edge. Fuck it. Rousing the obsidian shard hanging from the cord around my neck, its magic entered my veins. I choked off the flow, channeling only a wisp, enough for a single jolt of strength. Before the rest of what lurked inside me sat up and took notice, I flung the power out. A flutter of indulgence zipped across my nerves. Black blinded my eyes for a flash. Strength flowed through my hands and arms, and I shoved my enemy back in a cloud of dust. Overcome by my newfound vigor, the man's blade slid away. Freed from our embrace, I stabbed my sword toward his chest, and a measure of jagged steel burst out through his bearded throat in front of me. The blade reversed. A red fountain erupted from the hole. Choking on his own blood, the Lingorian teetered toward me. I pivoted clear, and he tumbled past me over the side of the ridge. Watching the night consume him, I took a step back, and the dirt under my left boot cracked. Pieces dropped away and drifted down into the dark. I shifted my stance, and the ground sunk under my right boot. I had about a breath before the entire edge broke off under my weight. My mind cycled through spells. Selecting one I was near to casting when blood-stained fingers wrapped around my arm. They dug in hard, and my rescuer, flaunting a Kalish long knife in his one hand, hauled me away from the edge with a grunt. I tried that without a rope once. A crooked grin softened the arrow scar on Jared Kane's lean face. He bobbed his shorn head in the direction of the drop-off. It wasn't fun. Neither was trying to haul your heavy ass back up. A breath after my reply, Jared's wry amusement drifted over me. It was accompanied by a good amount of adrenaline. Exertion and exhaustion pounded across the magical link that bound us together. The ache in my hands threatened to compromise my grip. Refusing to be engulfed by Jared's discomforts, I shook them off. Separating our sensations wasn't always easily done, so when I glanced over his shoulder and noticed the forest coming alive with torches and men, he felt my haste and my full-blown frustration. Jared's sharp blue eyes narrowed. What do you want to do? With my father's spell driving our oncoming opponents, I had two choices. Leave empty-handed again, or stay and kill them all. We'd already incurred a sizable delay with the first wave of soldiers. Another lengthy engagement would further shorten our window for getting in and out by morning. Being stuck behind the city wall at daybreak would increase the risk of a confrontation I wasn't ready for. It would make getting Lyra back that much harder. With one last aggravated glance at the lights punctuating the darkness below, I slid my sword into the belt at my waist. Come on, I started for the stream. You sure? No. I grabbed the pack I'd abandoned when the patrol attacked and slipped it on. Celestite, diamond, amethyst, tanzanite, and obsidian banded with silver adorned the wristlet tied around my right brace. I channeled their auras in unison as we ran. Jared took the lead. I followed his steps over the rock-strewn landscape, turning my concentration inward to the storm of magic surging through me. It was a beautiful mix. Their combined auras were a blizzard of frozen fire. I concentrated on it, refusing to let my mind wander beyond it. One drifting thought of more was all it would take to wake what else lay inside me. Each spell I cast was a gamble against fate for more scars, and no god liked being bet against. Hitting the knee-deep water at a fast clip, our boots churned up the rocky stream bed. Spray slashed to our thighs, but it was the only protection I had against the abundance of hornblende that comprised the city wall. I had no real idea how far out its influence would reach or exactly how water blocked the black stone's negative effects. At the moment, though, how didn't matter. Torchlight flared to my right. Arrows pierced the water. I released the magic and the aura spilled from my veins in a twist of color, giving birth to my door a few feet ahead with a pop of colored lines. Swiftly, the lines came together. Blackness grew in between. Wind blew from the door's edges, shooting out around us, tossing the water into a fine mist. As sparks burst inside the black, more arrows fled the trees. A barb shot in between us, dangerously close. Another stuck in the pack on my shoulder. I grabbed Jared and we dived, skimming the stream bed and tumbling into the void.